In the previous lectures, we've seen how to crack the WEP encryption in minutes, even if the target network is not busy. Now, in the next lectures, we will talk about cracking WPA and WPA2. First of all, before we start talking about how to crack these encryptions, it is very important to understand that both of them are very similar. The only difference between them is the encryption used to ensure message integrity. WPA uses TKIP and WPA2 uses an encryption called CCMP. In any case, this does not affect the methods that we're going to use to crack WPA and WPA2. Therefore, all of the methods that I'm going to show you from now on will work on both WPA and WPA2. Now, both of these encryptions came after WEP, and they were designed to address the weaknesses in it. Therefore, both of them are much more secure, and cracking them is more challenging. So, before we start talking about how to crack them, I want to cover a feature that, if enabled and misconfigured, can be exploited to recover the key without having to crack the actual encryption. The feature is called WPS. It allows devices to connect to the network easily without having to enter the key for the network. So it was designed to simplify the process of connecting printers and such devices. You can actually see a WPS button on most wireless enabled printers. If this button is pressed and then you press the WPS button on the router, you'll notice that the printer will connect to the router without you having to enter the key. This way, the authentication is done using an 8-digit PIN. So you can think of this as a password made up of only numbers, and the length of this password is only 8. So this actually gives us a relatively small list of possible passwords, and we can try all of these possible passwords within a relatively short time. Once we get this PIN, it can be used to recover the actual WPA or WPA2 key. So as you can see, with this method, we are not exploiting WPA or WPA2. We are actually exploiting a feature that can be enabled on these encryptions. So for this to work, first of all, we need WPS to be enabled on the network because it can be disabled. Also, it needs to be misconfigured, so it needs to be configured to use a normal PIN authentication and not a push button authentication. If push button authentication is used, then the router will refuse any pins that we try unless the WPS button is pressed on the router. Therefore, the method will not work if push button or PBC is enabled. So in most modern routers, PBC comes enabled by default or WPS will be disabled by default, so this method might not work. But because WPA and WPA2 are so secure and so challenging, it is always a good idea to check if WPS is enabled and try the method that I'm going to show you to crack the network. If it fails, then you can try the other methods that I'm going to show you after the next lecture.